Let's talk about control props. So control props is kind of an implementation of something that's supported in React by default for form elements, and that is the idea of controlled components. So basically, here we have an input. If we wanted to control what that value was, then we can provide a value prop, and then React will just no longer manage the state for the value by itself, and it will allow you to totally 100% manage the state of this input, the value state specifically. And so because you're now responsible for keeping that state updated, you also probably want to know when React would be updating that state itself. And so that's what the onChange prop is all about. It passes you whatever React thinks is necessary for you to update the state in the way that it would update. So it's kind of like the suggested change that React would make to the value if it were making that change. And that's why we get that event.target.value. That's React saying, hey, I'm not managing the state, but this is the value that I would set it to if I were responsible for updating this state. And so with that, we can then update our own managed state and get a re-render to set that value to what we want it to be. Now, the reason this is useful is because not only can you keep things synchronized with what React would do by itself, but you can also make programmatic changes to this value so that the user doesn't have to interact with the input for you to actually make changes. With a state reducer pattern, you can modify how state changes are made, but you can't determine when those state changes happen. And so the control props is kind of like a step up above the state reducer pattern. So that's the idea behind control props, is it gives you a mechanism to simulate this same type of behavior in your own components. And we've got an example of synchronizing two inputs that you can go ahead and look at and play around with. We've got two examples of real-world projects that implement this pattern you can take a look at as well. And for your exercise, your job is to make it so that these two components stay synchronized with one another. So if I reset this, we go click on one or we click on the other, they stay in sync. And that's something that wasn't possible with the state reducer, because with the state reducer, I could only update this toggle's state if I clicked on this toggle, but I can update it myself by clicking on this one. So let's take a look at how that all works down here. We now have this toggle component, and we're using the use toggle, getting the props, and then rendering the switch. We're taking this on property, and we're aliasing it to controlled on and forwarding that on to the use toggle. We're also taking this on change and forwarding that on to use toggle. And then down here, we're using that toggle function component and rendering two of those, where the on property is set, so this is being controlled, to this both on property that we're managing here with use state. And then we have an on change that points to this handle toggle change. So when either one of those gets clicked on, we're going to run this code here, where first we check if the action that was performed is a toggle, and we check with our own state if we've clicked too many times, and if we have, then we'll just return. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and update our own managed state, and we'll increment the number of times clicked. And then down here below, we're also rendering this regular toggle right here without managing the on state, because we want to make sure that we support both use cases because they're both useful. So go ahead, have some fun playing around with this exercise. I've got a lot of emoji comments for you to help guide you on your way, because this one's a little bit more on the complicated side, but I think you'll really enjoy it. And we've got a bunch of extra credits here for you for giving the user really nice and helpful warnings. Take a look at that example warnings file to see the types of warnings that you get for controlled inputs, and then see if you can implement those same kind of warnings for our controlled on state that we're going to be exposing in this use toggle hook.